Welcome, and thank you for joining us. We wanted to do a little bit of a talk on the idea of why embodiment matters in relation to our yoga practice. And in particular, tonight we'll focus on the idea of backbending as a representative of that. And many of us, actually most of us, come to yoga through some form of embodied practice, often through asana, or we may come through pranayama. We may even
come through
chanting.
Dancing or chanting.
Yeah.
Because it's all the rhythm of the prana.
And what we learn early on when we think of yoga as the joining together of things is that really within the embodied experience, as with the whole experience of yoga, the joining together of complementary opposite or complementary patterns is what yoga is all about. And in terms of alignment and form within the backbending world, that joining together is critical. And so in a sense, backbends are sort of the quintessential yoga posture that represents this joining together. And when it's working well, that's great. And when it's not working so well, it shows up much more drastically in backbends than in some of the other postures.
Right. It can make you feel extremely emotional or sad, or it can make you feel greedy and ambitious. It can make you cry.
Yeah.
Or you can actually hurt yourself. I've in backbending. Mm-hmm. So it requires a lot of mindfulness, a lot of careful attention. And so the backbend really takes the pattern of the prana, which is called also prana, but which dwells in the heart, which rises up and spreads, and is related to the manifestation of space and time and all the different things of nature, which in true embodied form, these are all like absolute delightful. They are just the wonderful light. But if the backbend, if the prana pattern in the heart hasn't been integrated with its beloved complementary opposite, the apana, which makes you exhale and deals more with forward bending, then the prana pattern, the backbending pattern, can really cut you off from other people or from other beings, from nature, from being grounded in our shared reality. And that's why we want to learn the essential form of backbending.
And so in a backbend, the legs are strong, or the base, even if, it's a simple backbend where you're sitting, or if you're doing something like bridge shoulder stand, where you are opening the core of the heart, but the base of the posture, the feet and the legs remain really, really strong. And that's this spaciousness and groundedness. And in a way that represents this vulnerability, which really is, when you think of like the way a dog that is lying on its back, sort of being very vulnerable to other dogs. That's what backbends do to us. But in order to really be able to experience full vulnerability, you have to be grounded. And you have to be open at the same time as you're vulnerable. And that's the kind of thing that backbending embodies. And it also embodies, sort of strength, but a sense of softness. And so what happens when we practice sometimes is we get carried away with the sort of the excitement of doing a full big backbend. And we get sort of usually more attached to or more excited by these feelings of openness or spaciousness or strength and so then we overdo it in one way or
something we
another.
get attached to the fame and fortune that will come from a big, beautiful backbend or something.
And so that in a sense, that's why we think of them as this quintessential representation of what can go awry when we are not consciously and intelligently embodying the asana. And we run into obstacles within the practice all the time. And it's talked about in the Gita, and the obstacles to practice are, most of us know of them in the Yoga Sutra. I think in the second chapter.
Oh, actually in the first chapter.
First chapter. One of my obstacles is numbers.
I think it's verse 30 in the first chapter.
Yeah.
And of course the first obstacle is yada, which means that you're sick or you're injured. And this is something all of us will experience more and more, particularly as we grow older. And that pain in the body manifests, as the inability to do things biomechanically well. And then from that, there are other obstacles, like Sana, you get stuck or you get distracted or full of doubt. And there's so many of these obstacles. Even eventually they call it Bhranti Darshanam, which means a bad view or incorrect philosophical view of everything. And so the way to stay in touch in doing a backbend, as you were saying, like feet strong. Mm-hmm. But if you're sitting or doing the fish pose, the feet are not quite, you can still be aware of your feet, but in yoga alignment, the feet really represent or like embassies of the pelvic floor. Mm-hmm. And so if you really exhale, which is, of course, in honor of the apana, the beloved of the prana, if you really exhale and you at the end of the exhale, you'll feel your pelvic floor tone, and it's creating a relationship between the pubic bone and the coccyx. And so then, if I'm going to do a back bend and I want the heart to float up, and if let's say we're sitting here, and this can be a subtle back bend, people don't even have to know you're doing it. You just sit, and when you start to, you just drop the pubic bone down as if they were just like very long, as if it had to do with the water element. So the inner thigh and the pubic bone drop down. And then your heart just wants to float up and you feel, I'm starting to do a beautiful back bend. And at the same time that you're dropping the pubic bone, the beloved of the pubic bone, the coccyx, which is a creature of the apana, also drops. And there's a electrical toning between the coccyx and the pubic bone. And in that way, as I do the back bend, I don't shorten my back and crunch it, closing the back of the diaphragm. I actually open up the area of the back of the diaphragm, the kidneys. And so I'm lengthening the back and I'm lengthening the front. And so you just lengthen the front, but do not squish the back of the body. And so this takes perhaps years and years of practice to actually get.
And it's a kind of practice that is very internal when you're able to take these complementary opposite patterns like extension in the front of the body along with extension in the back of the body, almost as if you had a hose that was turned on and you had water coming out of it, rather than trying to make an arc with the water by holding the hose in one angle or another, by really turning on the power of the water to come up and then naturally make the arc that it is destined to make because of gravity. That's what it feels like when you are extending on both sides of this physical experience of being in the body through a long, unobstructed breath, so that the backbend kind of happens rather than you making it happen. And when we make the postures happen, whether it's backbending or anything else, in other words, when we go into Padmasana and we crank the leg in, that's when an injury happens. Or when we are in a backbend and we become just determined to go very, very deeply, and we crunch the back rather than extend the back. We think, okay, I need to bend the back, but it's not really that. It's that we follow the natural arc, which is sort of revealed to us through the intelligence of breath. And so that brings us back into this idea of being fully embodied when we are doing our asana practices. And as we do them more and more and more, we become more tuned into the subtleties of what it actually feels like and what the experience of being embodied is. And in that way, we are able to sort of avoid or deal with some of the obstacles that arise. And you had some interesting ideas about like what embodiment means just in terms of everyday life and other people and in yoga people. Like, what is intelligent embodiment?
Yeah, because I think we're all embodied to some degree, but not that much. And so embodiment is really to feel deeply the prana or the quality of sensation throughout the entire body. And so some people would say, well, that is, when we sometimes talk about breath, we're talking about prana as breath, and which is, so that way breath can be in your sole of your foot, in the pelvic floor, and it's really sensation rather than just the air going in and out of the lungs. And so that's kind of essential to remember.
Yeah.
And so then when you get more and more embodied, you're biomechanically getting into the literally the central axis of the body, so that and this is where of course you're getting then into the realm of the central channel, the middle path, the perineum, the palate, the tongue, the kundalini, all of these things. These are the kind of the beginning of true total embodiment, in which what is becoming embodied is the joy of reality, the humble enthusiasm, the humble connection to nature, to other beings.
Yeah.
That's what's becoming embodied. And
yeah. And as you're saying this, the truth is that we all, turn up here in this human form in a body. But so many of us, and even those of us who practice yoga, we have ebbs and flows of being aware of our embodiment. But what for most people happens is, we kind of have some awareness that we have a body and we feed it and we sleep it and we bathe it and we, exercise it. But we don't really truly sort of give the ingredient to it that actually allows us to not feel attached to the body, and then identify in terms of having, a body, and identify in terms of our small self with our body. And that's one of the amazing things that yoga does help us do, is to sort of flip in and out of what is, sort of the ordinary embodied state where we're, yeah, I have a body and I'm going to get the best sneakers that are available. Or
it's my body.
yeah, it's my body.
My body is better than your body.
Yeah. And then we get into these poses, and back bending, when we do it really well, because of this feeling of vastness and spaciousness that is part of back bending, they really teach us to let go of our identity with our body, because we become kind of like overwhelmed by the glory of the feeling of the back bend, and of other postures too. We thought we'd talk about them tonight because they tend to do that.
And you actually feel that the body is impermanent. You feel that, and that's not, with full embodiment, that's not a cause of extreme distress.
No.
It's like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Just like everything else, it's a composition of impermanent wave patterns.
Yeah. And one way I've been visualizing it for myself recently, and I've explained this to Richard with a few raised eyebrows, like, but to me it's been very, very helpful, is to, as we're saying, it is really this experience of some intelligence in the body is kind of based in what you might call the breath body, or this internal breath that is far more than simply inhaling and exhaling, though it is also inhaling and exhaling. So we have this embodied form where we can move our own fingers, we can move our tongue, we can, make weird faces. And so we have, some control over our physical body. And then we have systems in the body, like the nervous system, let's say, or the circulatory system. And they, thankfully, just take care of themselves, so we don't have to deal with them. But then we have the breathing system, the respiratory system, and it takes care of itself. It's always there in the background, and it's this sort of jewel of awareness within us. But in addition to it taking care of itself, we can intervene and do things to bring awareness to that system in the body, whereas it's much harder to do so with the nervous system. Although through the breath, we can help ourselves to sort of calm the nervous system. We can help ourselves to...
we can control it to a certain degree. Even as when we're talking, we're using the breath and we're slowing down the exhale, or when we're singing, that might be, an even more effective method. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. And the vision for me or the visualization that has really helped me to understand that is this, sort of closing your eyes and feeling into this sense of the breath coming in and going out of the body, and imagining that it is this, almost as though it's like a diplomat or a go-between between the vastness that we also experience somewhere in our pores, in our cells, in the core of the heart. There's this vastness that is an absolute mystery that, as you were saying, if it's sort of the unknown within ourselves. And if we think too much about it, it can be just distressing. But the breath is the way we calm ourselves down and can then just sort of go into that space spontaneously. And at the same time, it also allows us to feel, feel misalignment in postures, or feel when we have a toe that we've stubbed and we need to sort of work on that. And so it goes in, the breath body goes in the other direction, almost into, that type of prana that is all over the body, like the
called Vyana,
Vyana.
which is the skin represents Vyana, and
Yeah.
it's like every point is the center, and so there's no center you have to grab onto, and it makes you like appreciate proprioception, like as you imagine what's the universe above me or below me, and if you're into astronomy, you can really stretch that, or to the east or to the west or to the north, to the south, or to the past or to the future. And you see that, the mind is just going back and forth, in sometimes a very subtle, quick, or vibratory dance. And it's that, and it never grabs it because it's an ungrabbable thing, but it's that vibrance that you're talking about that just shines when you
And it's really what the intelligence in the embodied
that's
body
what
is.
we mean by actual embodiment is
this intelligence. And it's through that that we can begin to take the mind and invite the mind into a sense of steadiness and stillness through which we can sort of begin to overcome obstacles. And so, and because obstacles are things that we experience through the body, through the sense fields, through the little bits of awareness that we have. So this intelligence is how we really start to work with the obstacles. And in the Yoga Sutra, the texts go on after verse 30, chapter 1, and go on to really explain how then do you've recognized obstacles, and we're making the case that you recognize them through intelligent embodiment. But then what? What do you do?
Yeah. Well, I remember the yoga, it says ekatattva bhyasya, or you practice one tattva. And the word tattva just means thatness. And deliberately, it's like a very Zen Buddhist style. All it means is thatness. And it doesn't say specifically, some philosophical, metaphysical word that you already think you know what that means. But tattva is it's a thatness. And then you're able to fix the mind in a tattva, or it's a experience of the wholeness or the luminosity of existence, the clear light, if you will. And so that's what you practice. And then they have a very powerful thing, which we've talked about, called Maitri, or metta practice, which is where you practice compassion or friendliness. Maitri means friendliness, friend, or compassion, or joyous appreciation, or a complete not getting emotionally trapped for the condition of when you meet someone who's happy, truly happy, then it's hey, and it doesn't even have to be a human, it could be nature itself. Or if there's suffering, then you practice compassion. And then if there's you meet someone who is joyously and truly embodied in the central channel sense, then it's just but then if you meet someone who is not kind, who is violent even, as as in the world today, we meet a lot of this attitude. Then you don't become like angry at them, but you see through. You see their suffering, and you don't grasp onto it. So you're then able maybe even to help.
And that really relates back to the ekatattva, because you are able to really focus on that is arising right before your eyes, and to hold it, and then to respond to it with from that place in the body that we're talking about, which is this central channel, the breath body, this diplomat within you that is, truly intelligent and not grasping onto your own identity. And one of the things that
I'll just a footnote, because you see this in yourself as you become more and more practiced. You start to see, I am not only I have the apunya, or the bad, that's part of also my ego structure, because sometimes I get really, and you have to see also that with compassion. And so you can't throw anyone outside of your heart.
One of the things we were talking about earlier today that I thought was really interesting, because the idea of ekatattva, meaning that you have one thing that you are focusing on. And one of the things we both love about the Yoga Sutra is they say, well, try this, and if that doesn't work, try that, or try that. And
even to the very end.
Yeah, it's a very forgiving kind of text in a sense, although it's also very prescriptive. But with the idea of focusing on one thing, we might think, oh, well, good, I'll just focus and then on any one thing, and I can really focus deliberately and firmly, and that will help me out of my suffering and help with relieving some of the obstacles that I may encounter. And what is important to discern between is the idea of dharana and dhyana. In terms of the 8 limbs of yoga, those are included in there. And what is the difference between those two, and how do they relate to the idea of ekatattva, or one focus?
Yeah, because I can focus obsessively and on just becoming better than everybody, and maybe
you must think about that. Yeah.
Well, or wanting to rule over the entire planet Earth, and then maybe the whole solar system. And this is all like the potential of the ego, and you can obsess on that, and that isn't really a healthy thing, and that wouldn't be a true embodiment.
Yeah, or to truly obsess on any one topic. In a smaller sense, we all do. Like you have a weird interaction with someone, and then you leave, and if you're me, you start worrying about it and thinking, I should have done this, or I should have done that. And that, as we well know, and as I well know, doesn't serve a beneficial function. In fact, that can be quite damaging.
Yeah.
And when one does something like that, and if you do obsess on something that's gone wrong, or something that you're worried about, or anything like that, the next time you catch yourself doing that, if you catch yourself, notice whether you have any awareness of your embodied state, or have you slipped into the more common way that most of us and many people always experience their body, which is just this thing that they drag along with them through life. They take their body to the gym, and they take the body to the grocery store, but it's not really, this intelligence.
Yeah, and when you catch or when you notice that, notice the breath. You come back to the breath. You come back to the breath, or the sensations that are associated with that particular obsession or that particular train of thought. Because, of course, the axiom is that as the prana flows in various patterns of partial embodiment, then that corresponds to the stories that the mind is telling you. Mm-hmm. And so the difference then is, if you can see that and you come back to like, oh, this is the feeling, or this is the pattern of the breath, rather than, just watching yourself become angry at yourself for being angry, or then you're able to like look, and you gradually fall into the state of dhyana, in which you have focused on something as a sacred space, and in the stage of dhyana, you see how that space interfaces with its background, its not only its immediate context, intellectually or philosophically, but with everything. And so you start to see, oh, infinity, and in that,
the obstacles.
That's the tattva.
And
that starts the elimination of the obstacles.
And that's that feeling that I was talking about, where you slip into it almost by, accident, where you are really focusing on the breath, and you slip into this sort of physical connection and feeling of spaciousness that really lives in the core of your own heart, that is the place within the embodied experience that we have that true, unspeakable connection to everything else. And as soon as you talk about it, it kind of ruins it. And so I'll apologize for talking about it again, but it's almost like a reflexive feeling and a reflexive insight that happens when you just bring a sense of trust into this process of good, clear focus from an intelligent, embodied state that naturally occurs where dhyana happens and where obstacles can be addressed. And in backbending, that very same thing happens when you really have gone into the backbend through the breath, rather than through a theory of how you should move to get in and how you have to practice this one pose 30 times in order to get a little more close to your ankles and grabbing your heels, that it just truly spontaneously happens. And you see this union of things connecting. And it is, in the Yoga Sutra, they really do talk about the power then of the breath as being one of the options.
Yeah, and after the profound recommendation in the Yoga Sutra of becoming compassionate, basically, of love, which is a pretty good recommendation. Then they say va. You can exhale deeply, a deep exhale, and then you pause for kumbhaka, and that will stimulate the apana. It'll stimulate the pelvic floor, and if they're in use, the feet, and then that will ground you, and then you can continue to on with the practice. And so that's a very powerful thing to do. And so again, my favorite word is va, which means or. or cha, sometimes and. So you get to add things. Cha and va. That's all you need to know for Sanskrit.
So you can inhale and exhale and pause, or
Yeah.
yeah, you can have spontaneous insight sometimes.
Yeah.
And that simple practice, that it is listed in the Yoga Sutra as this simple practice, and it's not like some fancy pranayama sequence, although those can be wonderful, but it is really pointing to the power of turning one's situation like over to this tool, this resource that we have within us, which is this natural intelligence that is the breath. And so when you describe it, it's not a strong kumbhaka and that you try to hold your breath as long as you can. It's talked of more as just a pause and a resting, rather than an acquisition of, oh, well, I held my breath this length of time.
Yeah, where's my certification?
Yes.
that I did this. And the thing is, it could be for certain practitioners a very, very long time, or it could be for many practitioners just, a few seconds. And it's the quality that matters.
Yeah.
And it really is the quality.
Yeah. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what we were wanting to talk about in this. And we leave you with this idea that really embracing the feeling, the sensations, the mystery of having this resource of breath and breath awareness, to really play with that idea of how can I learn to trust that, and trust that through that I can have a little more physical intelligence, emotional intelligence, possibly mental clarity, a little bit more intelligence, and
be of better service to others.
yeah. And it starts with the breath and it ends with the breath, just like life.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And keep breathing.
Thank you.